Alright, so today I want to answer probably one of the most frequently asked questions that I've seen under the comments section of my videos, and that is, how often should I feed my pet snake? And that is a very good question. I would say it's a pretty complicated question, and there's really no hard and fast answer. They really have to take into account several different factors as far as the snake is concerned. So if you're looking at hatchlings, it's a little bit different than adults. If you have an obese snake, it's a little bit different. And if you have a really large snake, like Lucy, she's my 80-pound reticulated python, that is a little bit different than ball pythons. And if you have females going into the breeding season, that is a little bit different as well. So I would say most of my snakes on a regular schedule, I offer pretty much across the board once a week as far as offering rodents. And that said, I would say it varies a little bit, especially if, for example, I actually got some snakes on Craigslist or from other breeders. I ship them in, and supposedly they were a year or a year and a half old, and they were the size of hatchlings. I don't know what Bobby's doing here, crawling all over the place today. But if I get like an adult snake that I know is a year or a year and a half old, and it's been super underfed, you know, a really small snake that's supposed to be a lot bigger from weekly feedings, I'll actually feed it quite a bit more. Or if I get a snake from someone that has been fasting for months and months, I'll actually really beef up the amount of food. Sometimes I'll feed, as a matter of fact, sometimes I'll feed 2 or 3 times a week for sometimes a month or 2 at a time until that snake has got some decent body condition. If I have a snake that's on a fast and then it's coming off of like a really long fast, like 6 months or 8 months, if all of a sudden it starts eating and I can start feeding that snake 2 or 3 times a week, I'll definitely feed it to try to get that, you know, metabolism up, get that body condition back on that snake again. So that's one instance where I would say I feed pretty much in excess of the typical schedule. And another time, there's actually some times where I actually don't feed for 4 or 5 months at a time. I don't even offer for a really long time, and that is when I'm pairing my male and my female ball pythons. I pretty much found out my first year, as soon as the females start developing the follicles, the premature eggs inside their bodies, they pretty much will go off of food until they lay eggs, which can take several months. And I got to the point after that first year of offering week after week after week, and I realized none of my females are actually eating a single meal until after they lay eggs. In the second year, I decided I'm not going to feed those females at all. So what I do is I pair up my males and my females. I'll take, like Bobby here is a male, and I'll rotate them through the females. And then as soon as those females go off food, maybe they skip a couple meals, and then they start developing eggs. You can definitely tell. It's funny because they go off of food, but they still get fatter and fatter and fatter. And then that tells you right there that they're developing eggs, and they pretty much won't eat until after they lay eggs. So in that case, I make sure they have water at all times. You definitely want clean water at all times with all snakes, but sometimes you can cut the food to basically zero, especially with the females, for months at a time. It's pretty amazing. And I would say a snake is really interesting in the metabolism. If you feed a snake like a 1 pound meal, like Lucy, my 80-pound reticulated python, if she eats like a rodent that weighs a pound, she'll actually convert more than 50% of that to body weight. So if I feed her, it's funny. I kind of go on a schedule where I decide, all right, I'm starting to clean out my rodent rack, and I kind of mark all these for they're really old and retired. And if I don't retire them, they just pretty much pass away in the rack from old age, because rats don't really live that long. It's about 1.5 years and 2 years, and they're pretty much too old to breed. It's pretty much the end of their lifespan. So what I'll do is I'll feed a lot of those to my big reticulated python, and that's actually why I got my retic. And the funny thing is I'll feed her probably 10 rats over a period of about 3 days. So it'll be, you know, maybe a rat today and maybe a rat in the morning and a rat at night, and then I'll repeat that maybe a couple rats at a time for several days in a row. And then once she gets 10 rats, I pretty much won't offer any food for a few weeks. And pretty much what she'll do is she'll convert 10 pounds of rats to like 5 pounds of body weight. It's pretty amazing what the conversion is. And retics are a little bit different because if you're feeding them when they're smaller, they have a really fast metabolism compared to a ball python. So if you feed a ball python, a rodent, usually you feed one that's like the size of the thickest part of the body. That's pretty much the maximum size you want to feed as far as a rodent to the size of the snake. So if you fed a rodent to this snake, the size of the body, you can actually see that it keeps that rodent in there. It has a little bump, or it keeps the body condition for almost a whole week until the next week. But a young reticulated python, it is amazing. They have a completely different metabolism. And when Lucy was small, I would feed her a rat that was bigger than this, where you could actually see a noticeable bump in her belly. It was a bigger rat than you would normally feed to a snake. And within 1 day, she would completely just like metabolize that. And 3 days later, she looked like you hadn't fed her in about 3 weeks. She was super, super skinny. It was amazing. And then she would just eat rat after rat after rat, and her metabolism was so high. So I'd say for reticulated pythons, they have a completely different metabolism. You can actually, especially when they're young, if you overfeed them, within like 3 or 4 days, they look like you haven't fed them in a couple weeks, which is amazing. It's the difference between the reticulated python and the ball python. And when I first started in snakes, I actually started with king snakes. And I would say adult king snakes have pretty much an extremely slow metabolism in my experience. I actually had one where I fed it week after week after week on a regular schedule, and that thing got so obese. It looks just like this little plump little king snake. It was a banana phase California king snake, and it was so fat I couldn't believe it. And I actually stopped feeding it for 3 weeks at a time, and I was offering small mice pretty much every 3 weeks to try to get it back down to a decent body condition. And it seemed like it took forever for that snake to actually lose the extra body fat that it accumulated from feeding it every single week. So I would say pretty much on average what I do is I feed every single week, but then I look at the body condition of the snake. So for example, Bobby here is thinning out quite a bit. He used to be quite a bit bigger until I started doing videos every single day with Bobby. And then I don't really feed him that much because I don't want to handle him that much with a rodent inside of him. Don't want to risk regurgitation. So I feed him smaller meals probably every couple weeks now. And he's getting to the point where I almost need to start feeding him on a regular weekly basis, maybe larger meals, and beef him up a little bit because, you know, in my opinion, I think he's looking a little bit thin. He's still got some good body condition, but I think he could be a little bit bigger. And the funny thing is I would say most breeders, they tend to keep their males on the thinner side. So most breeders would probably look at this male and say that male is too big and too fat as far as a breeder ball python. As a matter of fact, I have some males that have gone off of food that are quite a bit thinner than this. So he's still got some good body condition, but you know, as far as what I like to see in ball pythons, I like to beef them up a little bit more in case they go on a fast. Then they can withstand that fast without getting too thin. All right, so it is time for the question of the day. And Shane Hall asks, how long have you been breeding ball pythons? And pretty much I've been breeding snakes for about 5 years now. I actually started with a snake collection, not really intending to breed too much. I started with king snakes, and I actually had Arizona mountain king snakes. I had California king snakes. I had a Woma python, Australia Woma python. And the funny thing is I didn't really intend on getting into ball pythons just because it seemed like I really didn't know, I didn't have a clue about ball pythons, didn't really know that it was a really big thing. And when I first started getting into snakes, I got everything except ball pythons until I went to my very first reptile show, the NARBC in Tinley Park. And then I saw the mad frenzy over the tables that had ball pythons. And then it really opened my eyes. You know, it seemed like, you know, the king snakes were kind of popular and the Woma pythons, but the ball pythons seems like that is where all the flurry of activity was. And it wasn't until I really started studying ball pythons that I realized how amazing they are, especially with all the different morphs out there and the different combinations that are possible, and with all the brand new morphs popping up every single year. Ball pythons, let me tell you, that is where it's at as far as probably the #1 most popular snake in the entire world. So that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.